Somewhere in your dream, the forest becomes the sea again. But not the sea of danger and ships and mistaken identities. No, this is a sea as imagined by someone who has only ever heard about it from lullabies and paintings in children's books. The waves are made of silk. The foam smells faintly of lavender and old letters. The moon hangs unusually close, wearing a nightcap and looking a bit sleepy itself. You're floating effortlessly. No boat, no effort, just buoyancy. And there, not too far off, swims a familiar silhouette, sleek, curved, joyful. A dolphin. It leaps. Then, to your surprise, it waves. Yes, it waves. You wave back. Of course you do. The dolphin swims closer, and as it surfaces, you recognize the face. It's the pirate with the haiku. His eyes are wiser now, calmer. The transformation has softened his lines but sharpened his gaze. You look well, he says. You blink. You can talk? Only here, he replies. In the sea of second chances. Of course. Where else? He rolls over, belly up in the water. Do you remember how I tried to sell Dionysus? You nod. He snorts. So do I, every day, every moment. And yet, he gestures with a flipper. Around you, dozens of other dolphins appear. Each of them carries something small and odd. A feather, a spoon, a compass with no needle. Tokens, trinkets, reminders, perhaps. We're not punished, he explains. We're reoriented. You tilt your head. Into what? Into who we should have been. He answers without pause. Into what the sea and the stars and the god of wild parties knew we could be. Historians still debate the meaning of this tale's ending. Were the pirates freed or eternally bound? Did they retain human thought or become animal fully? Some scholars suggest the dolphin was a sacred guide for souls. Others believe it represented the slippery line between chaos and kindness. One academic even proposed that dolphins were just a clever allegory for remorse with flippers. The dolphin chuckles softly. We get visitors sometimes, dreamers, sleepwalkers, the occasional confused historian. He gestures again, and you see another figure, far off on a jellyfish raft. It's the turtle god, sipping something warm, eyes closed, clearly on vacation. You float closer to the haiku dolphin. What do you do, out here? He grins. We listen, we laugh, we rescue sailors who fall overboard, and we wait. Wait for what? He turns toward the horizon. For those who need to be reminded that mistakes aren't endings. That hangs in the air for a while. Long enough for the sea to rearrange itself into a melody you almost remember. A song your mother might have hummed when folding laundry. Then he says, "It's almost time." You frown. For what? For you to drift back. You glance behind. The shoreline of the forest has reappeared, stitched to the sea like a memory sewn into a quilt. Dionysus stands there, casually eating a peach while balancing a cat on his shoulder. The cat is reading a scroll, upside down. The dolphin nudges you gently with his nose. You begin to float backward, slowly, the water carrying you toward shore. As you drift, he calls out, "Write something when you wake up. Even if it's bad. Especially if it's bad. You promise." And then the sea lifts you one last time, like a lullaby given form, and deposits you back at the edge of the forest, where the moss sighs and the trees rustle in a language that sounds suspiciously like a chuckle. You open your eyes. Just slightly, Dionysus offers a hand. You take it. There's no ceremony, no trumpets. Just the quiet understanding that you've gone farther than most ever do in a single night. The forest begins to rise around you again. This time, not wild and unpredictable, but familiar, home-like. Somewhere behind you, a dolphin leaps. Somewhere ahead, a fig tree blossoms in slow motion. You walk forward, barefoot and perfectly at ease. Because now, the world you knew seems a little wider. And somewhere deep within, a grape seed of wonder has begun to sprout. The forest doesn't ask questions. It simply accepts your return, rustling its leafy eyebrows as if to say, "I?" You again. before parting just enough to let you pass through. The ground is soft with moss, and each step makes the gentlest shuff sound, like an affectionate exhale. Dionysus walks beside you, still barefoot, still peach-stained. He now wears a robe made of dusk, shifting hues of lavender, rose, and the kind of indigo that only exists right before stars blink on. You notice something curious. The path ahead is familiar. Not d'être familiar, but emotionally familiar, like the route to a beloved cafe that closed years ago, or the shortcut home from school, long overgrown. Have I been here before? You ask. Dionysus raises an eyebrow. Not in this life, maybe. That seems reasonable. The trees whisper stories as you pass. Quiet things, about someone who once carved hearts into their bark, and a fox that taught a lost child how to nap properly. These aren't your stories, but they don't mind you listening. You reach a clearing. In the center, the pirate ship. Yes, that pirate ship, but it's different now. No sails, no ropes, no signs of salt or storm. It's grown into the ground like a treehouse returned to nature. Vines cover the hull. Grapes hang where lanterns once did. Butterflies treat the crow's nest like a penthouse suite. A fig tree sprouts from the captain's wheel. And sitting on the deck, content, legs dangling over the side, is the former captain, the one who'd shouted orders and barked threats. Now, he's shelling peas into a bowl, humming something vaguely sea shanty-ish. You and Dionysus approach. The captain looks up. His face is fuller, warmer. He recognizes you immediately.
Aye!
You made it back, he says, standing. Takes most dreamers longer. You blink. Back to what? He gestures around. To the end of the story. Or the middle. Hard to say. Dionysus reaches up, plucks a grape, offers it to you. You take it. It tastes like memories you haven't had yet. The captain smiles. Want a tour? You nod. Of course. He walks you through what remains of the ship. The cargo hold is now a greenhouse. The brig has been turned into a library, mostly sea creature biographies, and at least one overly dramatic romance between a starfish and a ship's anchor. Every corner of the ship, turned sanctuary, holds small tokens of transformation. A seashell turned into a cup, a rusty spyglass now framing a miniature rainbow, a compass pointing not north, but toward where you most need to grow. Historians sometimes claim this part of the myth was added later, an optimistic ending grafted onto a tale originally meant to warn or punish. But others argue it's the natural conclusion, that Dionysus, for all his chaos, was never about destruction. He was about undoing, peeling away the rigid, the cruel, the falsely serious, to make space for becoming. The captain stops before a carved wooden plaque nailed to the helm. You squint at it. The words read, "You are not what you did. You are what you choose next." You glance at Dionysus. He shrugs like, "I didn't carve it, but I approve." The captain leans on the rail. Some nights, when the fog rolls in thick, I hear the sea calling. Not to return, but to remember, and I do. I remember how sharp I was, how certain, how wrong. He sighs. But then I look around, at this. He gestures to his new life. And I think, maybe the gods know something I don't. Dionysus snorts softly. We do. You smile. There's something deeply restful about this moment. About watching a man who once shouted at the tide now gather figs for jam. It reminds you that people can change, not just once, but again and again, like waves reshaping a shore. The sun begins to set, though oddly, it's also rising in the opposite direction. Myth, time doesn't obey the usual rules. You step off the ship. Moss welcomes your feet again. Dionysus turns to you.
Ready for what? He smiles.
To go forward, which sometimes looks a lot like going back. You don't quite understand, but your feet start walking anyway. The grape still lingers on your tongue, and behind you, a pirate turned. Gardener waves with a smile only someone who's forgiven themselves can make. You leave the clearing with its grape, laced ship and fig, scented breeze behind, but the forest seems lighter now. Less mysterious, more like a favorite old book you've nearly memorized but still want to read again. Dionysus ambles beside you, absent-mindedly twirling a fennel stalk like a conductor's baton. The path dips and swells with the gentleness of a lullaby, and fireflies begin to appear, not with flashes, but with slow pulses, like sleepy heartbeats. You ever wonder why pirates? You ask suddenly. Dionysus chuckles. All the time? You wait, but that's all he says. After a pause, he adds, I suppose it's because they already live halfway between order and chaos, between land and sea. That's very much my vibe. You tilt your head. Saw you chose them? Oh no, he laughs. They chose me. The minute they saw me asleep under a fig tree and decided they'd found their golden goose. You try to picture it. Dozing god, greedy pirates, awkward abduction. Did you ever feel insulted? You ask. He looks genuinely puzzled. Why would I? It gave me a chance to teach. Through surprise, sure. But I always say, if you can't transform your enemies into something amusingly aquatic, what's the point of being divine? You chuckle. Does it always work that way? Transformations, I mean. He grows a touch quieter. Not always. Some people resist it, cling to the shape that hurt them most. Others try to skip the hard part and just pretend they've changed. But then there are those who surrender, who unfasten the armor of their certainty and let something wilder in. He pauses, sniffing the air. Chamomile, he says dreamily. Somewhere nearby, a nymph is brewing tea. You walk on. The path takes you to a grove of peculiar statues. Not marble, not bronze. These are made from what looks like glass and water and shadows, and inside each one, a memory flickering faintly. In one, a boy gives a speech to a field of sheep. In another, a woman gently releases a bird from a cage, tears streaming down her face. In yet another, a child is laughing as an invisible hand tickles them, possibly a ghost, or just an imaginative sibling. These, Dionysus says, are things people think they've forgotten. You stare at one statue showing a group of friends on a rooftop under stars. Their faces are indistinct, but the warmth is unmistakable. He watches you watch it. You might have lived that, he says. Or not. Maybe someone dreamed it so vividly it had to be saved. Historians still debate whether Dionysus was merely a wine god or something broader. A guardian of dreams, memory, even ecstatic truth. Some fringe scholars suggest his temples doubled as healing centers, where sleep and storytelling were prescribed in equal doses. A few even argue that Dionysus was never meant to be worshipped, only understood. You turn to him. What happens to these? They wait, he says, for someone to need them again. The sky has turned a deep velvet, stars blinking into place like forget-me-nots. The trees no longer whisper, they hum, a low, slow tune that encourages nothing so much as a good stretch and a long yawn. You sit down on a mossy log, your legs grateful. Dionysus sits beside you and begins pulling small items from his sleeve. A golden thimble, a tooth carved into a whistle, a sprig of mint, relics from other stories, he says, setting them down between you. Each one left behind by someone who outgrew their legend. You pick up the whistle. It smells like pine sap and old jokes. Will I outgrow mine? You ask. Probably, he replies. But you'll carry pieces of it. Like breadcrumbs you'll never stop finding in your coat pockets. You lie back, staring up through the branches. I don't want it to end. It won't, he says. It'll just soften. And indeed, already, the edges of everything are beginning to blur. The forest, the log, even Dionysus, who now glows faintly, like firefly, light reflected in wine. You did well, he says softly. You listened. You turn to look at him. He smiles. Most people just ask for powers. You smile back, and then your eyes drift closed not from exhaustion, but from trust. Somewhere, A soft bell rings. A gentle wind stirs the air. A memory you didn't know you missed brushes against your cheek like a kiss. And as the hum of the forest deepens, you begin to feel yourself ease into something looser than sleep. Something older than forgetting, something kind. You drift through this waking forest in a way that feels less like walking and more like floating just above the moss, your toes occasionally skimming the cool green like a child idly tracing water with their fingers. Dionysus has vanished from your side, but not abruptly. More like a scent that fades gently, still present in memory, but no longer lingering in the air. In his place walks a deer, a white deer speckled with gold dust and patience. It glances at you once, makes a breathy huff of approval, and continues forward, clearly expecting you to follow. So you do. The trees begin to thin. The moss gives way to smooth, polished stone. Not cold, not rough. This is the kind of stone found in temples or very old theaters, worn silky by centuries of steps. Up ahead, something gleams faintly in a basin moonlight caught in still water. As you approach, you realize it's not a fountain or spring. It's a scrying pool. But instead of showing your face or your fate, the surface begins to shimmer with scenes not your own. A boy with wine, dark eyes trying desperately to teach a group of goats how to play a lyre. A group of old women giggling over fermented figs as if they've just invented the concept of comedy. A lion reclining in the shade of a fig tree, letting two toddlers braid its mane. Dionysian tales, perhaps, or fragments of them. The kind the ancients never wrote down because they were too odd, too tender, too obviously invented during festival hangovers. Is that real? You whisper to the deer. It flicks its ears. In response, the pool offers another image, a woman, wide-eyed, shouting at a mountain. The mountain responds by blooming into laughter. The woman grins, drops her weapons, and begins to dance. Historians still argue whether these stories were metaphors, a voice behind you murmurs, or if the gods really did interfere in such artistically inconvenient ways. You turn. Dionysus again. He's wearing a robe made entirely of grape leaves this time. It rustles softly even when he's still. You left, you say. He shrugs. I do that. You turn back to the pool. The next image shows the pirate crew. Not as you last saw them, but decades later, older, softened. Laughing over wine they probably brewed themselves. One is painting sea creatures on ceramic plates. Another is training a parrot to recite ancient riddles. They got their second chance. You murmur. They earned it. He replies. Most don't get handed new lives. But they chose the change. That's what makes the magic stick. The deer snorts softly, as if agreeing, and then trots off toward the tree line again. You sense it's time to follow, but not yet. You look up at Dionysus. Why me? He considers. Then gently, because you were curious and willing to be a little ridiculous. That tracks. He continues, most people ask for clarity. You asked for story. You let that settle. The scrying pool dims. The stones beneath your feet seem to warm with inner fire. Not burning, but as if you're being invited to stay just a little longer. You crouch, press a hand to the smooth surface. It hums. I won't remember all this, will I? You ask. Not the way you think, Dionysus says. It'll come back in dreams, in tastes. In that weird feeling when you walk into a thrift store and suddenly need to buy a carved mask, even though you don't know why. You smile. That's specific. He winks. We're nothing if not persistent. The sky begins to pulse gently with starlight, like a ceiling breathing. The trees sigh in chorus. Everything around you begins to loosen, shapes softening, edges smudging like chalk on fingertips. You rise from the scrying pool. Dionysus steps closer. Would you like something to take back? He asks. You hesitate. Like what? He reaches into the air and plucks something invisible. Opens his palm. There lies a fig seed. It's small. Unimpressive, maybe, but given the right care, it turns into shade and sweetness. Just don't eat it too soon. Take it. It feels warm, alive, the deer returns. It bows its head once very politely, and then begins to walk again. This time, when you follow, you don't look back, because you don't need to. The forest lets you pass. The air sings you forward. And behind you, somewhere far in the distance, Dionysus begins humming something oddly familiar, perhaps a lullaby made from moonlight and fermented mischief. You don't remember when your feet leave the stone, when your body becomes light, when the trees stop altogether. All you know is the rhythm of breath, the hush of leaves, the taste of fig not yet grown, and a promise, not spoken, but felt, that this journey isn't ending, just steeping. The deer halts at a clearing that feels like a pause in music. Not silence, exactly, but a held breath. The stars overhead cluster tighter, their glow filtered through soft night mist that settles on your shoulders like a shawl woven from quiet. You feel full. Not heavy, not sleepy in the usual sense. Just full of story, like a sponge saturated with warm tea. The deer nudges your side gently, then bows once more before vanishing, not in a blink, but in a slow dissolve, like fog lifting or memory slipping, just out of focus. You step forward, and suddenly, you're on a boat, not the pirate ship from before. This one is simple, wooden, unpainted, rocking slightly on a glass, calm sea that has no visible end or shore, just horizon and stars. A single lantern hangs from the mast. Its flame flickers in a way that seems synchronized with your breathing. And there, reclining near the stern, is Dionysus again, still in his grape, leaf robe, now wearing a hat made entirely of ivy. "Took you long enough," he murmurs, half smiling. You sit across from him, the wood warm beneath you, the sea air tinged with lavender and salt. "What is this place?" you ask. He leans back, resting his head on a folded satchel of fig leaves. "Some call it the in-between," he says. "Others call it the forgetting place. I call it a convenient way to delay answering questions you're not ready to ask." You chuckle. A pelican glides silently overhead, wings barely stirring the air. Somewhere, a fish leaps, not with urgency, but with the slow grace of someone stretching in their sleep. "You know," Dionysus says, reaching into a pouch and producing a tiny bronze bell. "There was a time I couldn't get anyone to believe this story." You raise an eyebrow. He nods. They thought it too odd, too symbolic. Why would a god turn pirates into dolphins? They asked. "What's the moral?" He lets the bell ring once, softly, like wind through hollow bone. "I don't always give morals," he says. "Sometimes I just give movement, and grapes." You gaze out at the sea. The boat drifts, but there's no urgency, no direction required. Just the rhythm of small waves lapping the hull, and the sensation that you've come not to an end, but to a resting point between verses of a longer song. Historians still argue whether this story was meant to be a warning, he says, or a celebration. You glance back at him. Which is it? He shrugs. Both. Maybe neither. That's the fun of me. You smile and lie back on the deck. The wood creaks like an old lullaby. The stars overhead tilt gently, just enough to make the sky feel like a cradle. He speaks one last time, his voice barely above a whisper. "Here's what I know. Transformation never asks for permission. It simply knocks. And if you open the door, even a crack, the vines will find you." Then he closes his eyes and the lantern dims.